there is tons of stuff coming at us all together. Really hard to make sense of it, and easy for your mind to pick one or two things that you think are all encompassing. But I suggest that one of the ways you should think about everything that's coming at us is that we have a lot of changes going on all at once. And they are changes that dramatically impact the future of the United States. So the changes that I want to call your attention to are the fact that Trump is falling apart and his presidency is falling apart. There is the United States and its position in the world is in real jeopardy right now because of Trump's war in Iran. I'll tell you a little bit about that's going on as well. So there's a lot of foreign affairs stuff jockeying, going back and forth. And at the same time in the United States, there are politicians, primarily Democrats, though a few Republicans, who are responding to the will of the people. And as they do so, they're both pushing back against the Trump administration and articulating new programs, new things they want out of the United States. And so as you look around, you've got all these different stories going on at the same time. And some of them are just eye-poppingly bad. And some of them are really sort of intriguing. And some of them are actually really eye-poppingly good. And it's hard to put all those things together because they're all sort of jumbling in one big basket. So I won't get to all of them. Obviously, I could just sit on, apparently there's a streamer who just spends all their time reacting to the news online. And I could totally do that. I could just sit here with my phone all day and comment on all the stories that are coming through these days, and we'd all be bored out of our minds. So we're not going to do that. But I will outline what I just suggested to you about the decline of the Trump presidency and what that looks like, and some of what's going on in Iran and how those two things are related, and perhaps some of the revisioning of the United States that is just beginning right now, but it's being picked up by a number of politicians, again, primarily Democrats, but some Republicans. So first of all, there was a story in the Wall Street Journal this weekend about the fact that Trump was so unhinged and so angry after the shooting down of the plane in Iran that his aides didn't actually keep him in the room when they were getting news from the front. Instead, they felt that his fury and his inability to manage the situation would do more harm than good. So they isolated him from what was actually going on and just told him the stuff that they thought he needed to know. That's a really big deal. That is a really big deal. If the commander-in-chief is incapable of being the commander-in-chief, that's 25th Amendment material, impeachment material. That's a really, really bad situation. Now, a number of you asked about the report that we have had over the weekend that Trump demanded the nuclear codes and that General Dan Kane wouldn't let him have them. I have not seen that myself from a credible source. I've seen it about 4 or 5 times, and it's my guess that somehow somebody took that story about how angry and inappropriate he was and took it a little bit beyond what information we now have would warrant. I could be wrong. There could be good, solid evidence of that out there that I just haven't seen. But it's not really a surprise because we know he talked that way in his first term. And we also know something that I feel has gotten really too little attention. And that's that in his first term, Trump's people initiated the development of sort of weaker nuclear weapons, strategic nuclear weapons than we'd had in the past, because they rejected the idea of massive deterrence and instead said, well, if we can create nuclear weapons that aren't as bad as the ones that would, simply flatten everything, we could actually use them. And that would be more of a deterrent than having nuclear weapons that nobody can use. And they did, in fact, develop those strategic nuclear weapons. And it's something that really hasn't gotten a lot of attention. But if you're interested, just Google it, strategic nuclear weapons Trump, and you'll see that information come up and what they were doing there. So it's not like you can see how somebody would have gotten there. Maybe Trump did do that. I personally have not seen anything that looked to me to be adequately sourced to say that that really happened, but it wouldn't be a surprise. So there was that story coming out over the weekend, but there was more than that. Remember that the Wall Street Journal is owned by the Murdochs, who are the Fox News people, the real right wing media people, and they have been looking the other way, at least. When the Wall Street Journal's reporters put out stories like this for a long time now, which suggests that they have really soured on Trump, and that will really matter for the larger media ecosystem. And just to be clear, the Wall Street Journal's editorial page is far right. It's really, I read it every day just to see what they're talking about, but it's really far right. Their journalists are very, very good. They're good, solid journalists. Especially Josh Dawsey is one of the ones that I follow. He moved over there from the Washington Post, but he's a really good, solid political reporter. And in fact, there's not a reporter over there off the top of my head that I have a complaint with. So when you hear Wall Street Journal, remember, there's a real difference between the editorial page and the news desk, and that this reporting from, I think Dawsey was on the story I just told you about, but it was good, solid reporting. Now, at the same time, over the weekend, and I don't remember what day it came out, there was a story in The Atlantic about Kash Patel, who's the director of the FBI. And what it said was that he has a drinking problem, he's not spending much time at the office, and that he himself is a national security risk. Now, he went on the talk shows on Sunday to say this isn't true, because he's actually had issues with Trump before over what he did, a number of things he's done, but he has not been a rock solid FBI director. But Trump was especially upset about the pictures of him drinking in the hockey locker room of the U.S. men's hockey team at the Olympics. And so he sort of went on the television to say this is, the story is not true at all, and then really to try and court Trump again by saying we're about to arrest people who were involved in stealing the 2020 election. And Patel has sort of a history of getting in trouble with Trump and then throwing him some red meat. And that seemed to be what he was doing. Then on Monday, he came out and sued The Atlantic and the author of that piece for $250 million, for $250 million. And that would, in fact, involve having what's called discovery in the trial, which would mean that people would have to testify under oath. And immediately, journalists have filed Freedom of Information Act requests of the government wanting to see Kash Patel's schedules and whether or not there are any memos or law enforcement or security enforcement issues having the words hangover or drunk or anything like that. But there's something, not only is Kash Patel weakened and really a liability, not just for the country, but for the president. But there's something else about the stories that you're starting to see coming out of the administration. And that's, I've said this to you before, a tight administration, an administration that is working well, is not going to have leaks. People are going to be loyal to the team, and they're not going to want to jeopardize their relationships, and they're happy with where they are, so they don't tend to leak. The Trump administration is leaking like a sieve. I mean, this is one of the places where Pete Hegseth, as defense secretary, has tried desperately to stop the leaks there. Remember, he tried to get rid of all the journalists who were at the Pentagon and replace them essentially with right-wing hacks. And it didn't work. In fact, the good journalists continue to have sources from within the Pentagon, and they're still getting great stories. But the fact that the members of the FBI have turned on Kash Patel to this degree, that I believe there were 12 people at least cited in that Atlantic story, suggests that the cabinet offices are starting to fall apart. And you saw the same thing at the Department of Labor, where the Secretary of Labor has just resigned because so many people complained about her tenure there and the advantage she was taking of people, asking them to bring liquor for one thing to her offices, asking her to do personal tasks, and having, I think, men in her family, I don't remember which ones they were apparently making advances on the women staffers in the department. Anyway, she resigned. And what you're seeing, I think, is a number of things. One of the things that interests me here is it strikes me that MAGA Republicans for so long have complained about everybody in government simply using the place for their own interests, that they really believed it was true. Then this is sort of a form of projection. You think other people would act like you would. That's not actually what was going on. People in those positions were actually doing their jobs. And then once MAGA people got in there and treated them with the disdain that they had held for those jobs, you're watching it all fall apart. And so that suggests now Trump has lost his Secretary of Labor, his Attorney General, and his Homeland Security Secretary, all women, which is not a coincidence. But remember I said to you a few months ago that you had to start picking away at his cabinet because his cabinet was protecting him, and not just by acting in certain ways that protected him, but by deflecting the other attacks that would come on him. He could just push them off on his cabinet secretaries, and those cabinet secretaries are dropping. And you saw today on the Hill, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the Secretary of Health and Human Services, just kind of getting eaten alive by people who were listening to him at a hearing. So more and more there is pushback against the administration, and that is a reflection in part of Trump's weakness, but it is also a way to weaken him. Those two things work together. All right. So what else do I mean by what's going on here? Iran. So if you remember, Trump went into Iran on February 28th, striking alongside of Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, had given a presentation to Trump convincing him that it would be sort of quick and easy to go into Iran, and suggesting to him he could be a great hero if he did so. A presentation that he has made to every president, I think, since George W. Bush, and they've all said to him, this is, as somebody from the New York Times reported after Netanyahu's presentation to Trump, that it was delusional, that was simply not the way things were going to go. But Trump bought it in part because he had that quick strike against Venezuela and expected he could do the same thing in Iran. And instead what he did is he kicked a hornet's nest, and then he stomped on a hornet's nest, and then he rolled on the hornet's nest. And then all the other hornets came and he fought with them as well, because there's a real asymmetry between what the United States can do with all its extraordinary military might and what Iran needs to do in order to be able to declare victory over the United States. Those two things are asymmetrical. So the U.S. has done an enormous amount of damage to Iran, and Israel as well has done an enormous amount of damage to Iran. And Israel, of course, has been bombing southern Lebanon as well, where the Iranian-backed Hezbollah operates. They're a non-state actor, but they're backed by Iran, and they're not part of the Lebanon's government. So the recent ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon's government was that was the ceasefire that stopped the bombing in southern Lebanon for about a minute and a half. They're still, theoretically, the ceasefire is still holding. I don't quite understand how you can have ceasefires when everybody's still firing at each other, but there you go. I guess it's reduced. I don't know. But anyway, he expected that this is going to be quick and easy. And instead, what happened is that while the United States and Israel have done an enormous amount of damage, as I say, all Iran has to do to maintain victory, or to maintain that they are succeeding over the United States, is to survive. And in this case, to close the Strait of Hormuz, which is pretty easy to do. That's that strait through which about 20% of the world's oil travels, and more than that of liquid natural gas, and I think it's about 30% of fertilizer, the components of fertilizer. And you can really close it largely by threatening. And what that means is that the big world insurers that are all of them backed by Lloyd's of London, which I talked about to you a few days ago, the insurers say we can't insure you. And if you can't be insured, you can't run a ship. At the end of the day, who gets insured is and how insurance works is remarkably interesting. And someday I will do a whole lecture on insurance, because that really, once you get insurance, which comes from Lloyd's actually. Lloyd's actually started in a coffee house. I'm sorry, I won't go deeply in this rabbit hole, but it's sort of interesting. They started to insure ships by all the ship owners getting together and saying, we'll pool our resources to make sure that, it's called underwriting. They literally would put their names under each other's so that if one ship goes down, you don't lose everything. We all take a hit, but everybody can continue to function. And that's basically how we got the modern concept of insurance. And I'm going to stop there because it's really interesting how that translates to America. And it's killing me, but I'll stop there. Anyway, he expected this was going to be easy, and it hasn't been. And he keeps screaming at people going, we're winning, we're winning, we're winning. I won. This is great. Everything's lovely. And then Iran says the strait is closed because you're not doing what you said you were going to do. And he keeps screaming, you can't do that. You have to open the strait. And remember, first of all, he tried to get other countries to open the strait. And they were like, dude, it's not our problem. We didn't get a hornet's nest. And then he tried to threaten Iran into opening the strait. Remember, he said, civilization's going to die. And then over the last weekend, he simply said, great news, it's open. Everything's great. They're never going to close it again. And meanwhile, Iran's like, not really happening until you stop blockading our ports, which is what Trump has been doing. So what this has done is it has, first of all, dramatically weakened the United States, and it has dramatically strengthened Iran, but it's also made the United States look incredibly erratic, because Trump will say one thing and his advisors will say something else, and then he'll turn around and change what he said. So, for example, he said that Vice President J.D. Vance was not going to Pakistan for talks, and then he said he was, and then he said he was on his way at the same time that J.D. Vance actually was in a motorcade pulling up to the White House. And then as of today, the talks were off, and he said he was not going to extend the ceasefire with Iran, which ends tomorrow. And then tonight, he said, I'm going to extend it indefinitely. And the bottom line is Trump has no good options in Iran. There really are no good options, simply because it's so easy for Iran to close the Strait of Hormuz, and it is not easy at all for Trump to force it to open again. And so probably what we're going to see there is Trump taking a huge loss and simply announcing that he won. And it will probably look like Iran reopening the strait in some form, and probably being able to either put a toll over the strait or have access to its frozen assets that are still around the world. But it's a really big problem for Trump. And one of the things that's going to come out of this, of course, is we're starting to see now is that gas, the price of a barrel of oil is sold as oil futures. And now we have seen the last of the oil from before Trump invaded coming to other countries. And so what you're going to see now is the more expensive oil starting to move its way into the system. And as that expensive oil moves its way into the system, you're going to see prices rising even more than they already are. So we've already seen inflation. You're going to see more and more inflation. And about 80% of the oil infrastructure in Iran has been damaged by the bombing, and it's also been damaged in other Middle East countries. So going into the summer, you're looking at really high prices, and it just is. That's the way it's going to be, and that's not going to help Trump's approval ratings, which are at all-time lows. There was a new poll out today that had him at 35% job approval, which is about the level, actually a little bit lower the level that George W. Bush was at the very end after Katrina and all that. And Trump's there now, and there's no sign of how that could possibly come back. All right. So there's a couple more things about what's going on here. With this weakening of Trump, you're seeing two real things. You're seeing, first of all, him doubling down on the idea of manipulating the vote in 2020. I'm sorry, what year were it? 2026, the midterm vote. He's trying desperately to get voter rolls from around the states. And the reason for that is because he wants to get the voter rolls and run them through a piece of software that really crazily, confusingly has the same name as the SAVE Act. It's called the SAVE system. Totally different acronym. But what it was designed to do was to look through people who were applying for federal benefits, housing benefits, food benefits, whatever, and to see whether or not they were an undocumented immigrant. Now, he wants to use voter rolls to put through that system because he insists he's going to find undocumented immigrants voting. That's a myth. They just don't vote. There's no reason to. And the system, as it's been put into play in a couple of Republican states, has a failure rate of 14%. Up to 14%, meaning that people get flagged as being an illegal voter, as an undocumented voter, when in fact they are completely legal. And what this is going to do is going to tangle up all those voting systems. So he's doubling down on that very unsuccessfully. This is being fought in virtually every state, even Republican states. But he's doubling down on that. He's also doubling down on trying to rev up his base. And you see that this week in this idea that he's reading the Bible as part of this America Reads the Bible thing from a Christian nationalist group that has been associated with election deniers from 2020. And with that, it's a little bit insidious here. The verse that he is reading is the same verse that was read the morning of January 1st, 2021, and has been associated with him because it's the verse about God saying, I will send someone to heal your nation. And true believers for Trump believe that that was him. And so he is reading this verse that harks back both to the insurrection of January 6, 2021, and that says, remember, I'm your savior. At the same time that he has also been posting pictures of himself as Jesus and picking a fight with the Pope. So he's trying to double down on that group of people. It does not seem at this point to be working. What is more worrisome about the 2026 elections is that he has amassed a war chest of $350 million to influence these elections. And there seems to be more of that coming from especially the tech bros who are very concerned about Democrats starting to rein in some of their contracts, starting to rein in their government contracts, starting to rein in some of the ways in which they're trying to spread these data centers. They seem determined to keep Trump and the pro crypto, pro tech bro group in office. And that's out there right now, as is the fact that with all the problems from the economy from Trump's war in Iran, there's real trouble in the Gulf because they can't sell oil right now. And the United Arab Emirates, or UAE, there was recently a story that they had asked Trump essentially to backstop their currency using our tax money. And in the I'm afraid I don't remember what paper it's in today. There's a discussion of him actually saying, "Yeah, we're considering backstopping that currency again with our money from the Treasury." But you have to remember that the United Arab Emirates royal family, that with their sovereign wealth funds, have invested in Trump and the Witkoff family's World Liberty Financial, which is their cryptocurrency, and they put $2 billion into the stable coin of that cryptocurrency. So they have essentially lent the Trump family the use of $2 billion, and they get to keep the interest off that. And because of those ties now, or at least those ties are there, the United States Treasury is saying, yeah, we'll help you out because of the war Trump started. And I think, again, this is one of the reasons we're all so confused about so much stuff coming at us is it's really a rat's nest of ties and corruption in this administration, and it's going to be a lifetime to untangle it.